We're going to get more to the conversation on Michael Bloomberg, which I know, Robert Costa, you're covering in just a moment. But first, former Mayor Pete Buttigieg has turned his focus to Senator Bernie Sanders as well, in hopes of keeping his lead in the delegate count. Over the weekend, Buttigieg looked to draw contrast between his and Sanders' health care plans, tweeting, "Medicare for all who want it covers every American and won't raise taxes on the middle class. Bernie Sanders' plan raises taxes on every American making over $29,000. This election will decide which plan we take on Donald Trump with." The former South Bend mayor also slammed the plan's cost and Sanders supporters' recent attacks on union leaders over Medicare for all.
We could get completely trapped down the rabbit hole of a debate over whether to abolish private insurance, which most Americans don't want, or we can deliver quality public insurance that is available to everybody who is so vulnerable, that is affordable or even free if you wouldn't be able to afford it otherwise. We can do that because the American people want it to happen, and then it actually moves through Congress and gets done, instead of us being here 4 years later debating how long it's actually going to take to deliver.
You know, it's really disturbing to see the culinary union attacked when these are workers who have stood up and fought for, among other things, good health care plans. They're not interested in Washington taking away their choice.
Can't really question the strategy, Adrienne Elrod, given that Pete Buttigieg came in the top tier for Iowa and New Hampshire. But here's my question for you. Does Joe Biden have a chance? Looking ahead to Nevada and South Carolina, what's going on with the campaign? What's your gut?
You know, Mika, I think he still certainly has a chance. I think it's a limited chance, but he certainly has a chance because, and this is something that his campaign is the point that they've made time and time again, we have not had a lot of diverse voters cast votes in this election yet. Obviously, Iowa and New Hampshire, largely white states. Joe Biden's strength still remains in Nevada and South Carolina, states that are largely diverse. Has he lost a little bit of support? Sure. I think Wednesday night's debate is very crucial for Joe Biden. He's got to demonstrate why he's still fighting in this race. He's got to give donors reassurance why they should still be funding his campaign. That's going to be one of the real challenges. But I think if he finishes in the top two in Nevada, and his campaign does believe that they may come out of Nevada with the largest raw vote total, I think if he finishes well in Nevada and, you know, has a win in South Carolina, then he can go into Super Tuesday with some momentum. But the real challenge for Joe Biden is, can he give those donors of his reassurance? Because, Mika, we've talked about this time and time again. He doesn't have the strong grassroots donor base that Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg have, and Elizabeth Warren to an extent. He's really relying on larger donors. So he's got to figure out a way to sustain his campaign, keep it funded. He's got a narrow window to do that, but it certainly is very much a potential for him to be able to do that going forward.
Jonathan Lemire.
Yeah, Nevada is certainly sort of the overlooked of the first four states. You know, it is, first of all, it's another caucus scenario, and there are reports that we may have some more chaos there, which will be great fun. Shades of Iowa, perhaps. But it shouldn't be overlooked for us, because it is going to dictate some momentum going into South Carolina, and it's the first state with a diverse voting population. So, Alicia, let me get you on this. They just showed some poll numbers there. There hasn't been nearly as much polling out of Nevada as as Iowa, New Hampshire, or certainly South Carolina.
Which is an issue in and of itself.
For sure. And I was struck by one thing, that the margins are certainly close, but Pete Buttigieg is trailing even Tom Steyer in Nevada. So where could this be for him if we know his struggles to attract minority voters? If he puts up a disappointing fourth or fifth, South Carolina with an even more diverse voting population looms next. Could he, like, even as great of a story as is out of the first two states, could he really be hitting a wall right now?
That is certainly the argument that the other campaigns have been making. Before we get to Buttigieg, let me talk a little bit about who we see at the top of that heap, and that is Bernie Sanders. If you talk to the Sanders campaign, they will tell you part of the reason that they have those numbers in that state is because they made an early and deep investment in Latino voters. So they have about 200 staffers in the state. They say about 76 of them are Latino, 11 different field offices, and they really credit themselves with the fact that they started very early, that they went up with ads in Nevada very early, and that you simply, to your question about Mayor Buttigieg, cannot make up for that lost time, right? If you did not make that investment early, this is a state where about 30% of the population is Latino, about 20% of the electorate is Latino, so they will play an absolutely critical role. I think it's really interesting. You look at the 2018 midterms, Nevada overall had wild turnout. I mean, they had near presidential turnout during a midterm, and a big part of that was driven by Latinos. So it is important for whoever the eventual nominee is. Part of what Nevada is a test, right? It's a test for whether or not you can then turn those people out in a general. And part of what is so interesting is that the states that will follow Nevada after we get through South Carolina, there will be tests in California, in Arizona, in Texas, in Florida. So it's going to come hard and fast, and that demographic is going to play a huge role.
Robert Costa, what do you see happening here? Obviously, in the run-up to Iowa and New Hampshire, Joe Biden was at the top of all the polls, and it looked like he was, headed to first place, and then began to slip right before. Who or what impacted his campaign?
At this point, Vice President Biden faces stiff competition from others who are advocating for a Medicare for all who want it, a public option, however you want to phrase it, type health care plan. Mayor Buttigieg, Senator Klobuchar. Now you have Mayor Bloomberg in the race making his own electability argument. But he also faces a real candidacy challenge in Senator Sanders. We always talk about Iowa as this 90% white state. But when you look back at how Senator Sanders handled that campaign, it's indicative of how he's handling the Nevada caucuses. Iowa is 90% white, but he spent a lot of time focusing on that other 10%. You saw events across the state there and in Nevada now. Tio Bernie talking to Latino voters directly. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez campaigning as a key surrogate for him. And you also see in the firewall of South Carolina for Biden,
right?
Senator Sanders has learned a lot of lessons from 2016 when he stumbled into South Carolina in a competition with Secretary Clinton. In the last 4 years, he has built up his relationships in that state. So you see Sanders moving forward without too much competition on the left because Senator Warren has been struggling, and then Vice President Biden facing all of this competition in the center.
So much competition, Eddie Glaude, and I wonder, looking ahead to Nevada and South Carolina and the debates that are all right in front of us in the next 2 weeks, debates that Michael Bloomberg may or may not participate in. I guess we're waiting for one more poll. Yeah. He probably will.
Likely will.
Likely will. So back to the electability argument here, looking ahead to these next two races, he won't be participating in the first 4 states.
Right, and it seems to me that
so how does America get to know what they're electing?
Beyond commercials and political ads, right? I mean, that's a really important point. But, as we pivot to North Nevada and South Carolina, the debate will take up issues that now involve a much more diverse America. It will have to take, the candidates will have to address questions of immigration. They're going to have to address questions of immigration reform. They're going to have to address the question of where minority populations sit within the context of this economy and its recovery and the like, right?
Who's the president of Mexico?
Who's the president of Mexico? You have to know that if you're going to be on Telemundo, it seems to me. You have to know anything about the global South if you're going to be on Telemundo, it seems to me. But one of the interesting things about Sanders and I think Biden is that, recent poll data shows that Biden is leading Democrats among non-white voters. We saw the Morning Consult where we show that Sanders jumped 10 points. And so what are we looking at here? What we're seeing is that the democratic process is working itself out. Now, Black and Latino voters are actually participating in the national process, and they're beginning to add their voice to the conversation. And we're going to see how these candidates respond. And there's a reason why Amy Klobuchar has to come out and now present a plan. There's a reason why Pete Buttigieg has to not be Dick Gephardt. He has to come out with the plan. And so now, the cards are on the table. Let's see what happens.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.